And this is the consequences. This is a picture I took in Charlottesville. This is the street I walk on my way to work at the University of Virginia. This is a pedestrian crosswalk. This is supposed to be the safe part of the street to cross. And this is how they improved it. They replaced that sign. And we're scrolling through a little faster than I expected. Okay, thank you for that help. Yes, that works. All right, I want to thank you all for that help. And this is how we switch from pedestrian priority to car first priority. This is the guy, I'm oversimplifying, but he really was of national significance in this transformation. I don't have time to tell you exactly how, but our task now is to see if we can put this triangle back. I don't mean reconstruct history exactly like it was, but if they made this work before, I think we can make it work again. This is the status quo that Edward Merrin overturned. Boxed off in red here are statements of the Supreme Court of the state of California in 1871. They're saying streets are for all conditions of persons. That's equity, that's inclusion in 19th century language, including children. Children not only have a right to play in the streets, notice this, they have a right to play unattended, and it is necessary for others to look out for them. We don't have to recover this exactly as it was then, but we can set this as an example of what's possible if we really are interested in change. So I've got 4 points to make tonight. The first is that streets are for people is as American as a Ford F-150 with a gun rack. We have a history here that we have forgotten, where this was in fact an American value. Safe Streets advocacy is a great American tradition. Amazing technology, while useful, is not the answer. It doesn't solve the problem for us. And finally, unimaginable change is possible. Those are the 4 points I want to make now, and the rest of the time we have this evening, beginning with streets are for people. All right? I want to show you what history has told me, namely that walking was deterred, devalued, and denormalized. And I'm featuring walking because walking is the indicator species of everything else. If you have a city where you can walk, then you have a city where you can do everything else. And that includes, of course, rolling and micromobility. And if you have a city with transit, as Andy Bano will tell you, you have a city where walking is augmented. Transit's like a walking augmentation system. It makes walking much more practical. I want to walk through these three here quickly. Walking was deterred, and you can see that exemplified in the cartoons from the 1920s, where there is a perception here that while people want to walk, it has become dangerous and intimidating to try to walk. And that's why the old couple on the left are struggling to get across the street, or the woman waiting in the safety zone in Washington in 1927 for the streetcar is thinking twice about how she's going to get around this city. Walking was also devalued. You can find this in particularly engineering reports, like this one from 1947 that says heavy pedestrian movement is a problem. It is actually a sign of a vibrant, healthy city, but here in Rochester, New York, it's being pathologized. Even the Federal Highway Administration is saying if you delay a driver, you're causing much more economic loss than if you delay a walker, which of course makes no sense at all, because supplying that road capacity for that driver is vastly more expensive, right? It was denormalized, and to capture that I want to show you a couple of pictures, again from Rochester, New York. This is State Street in Rochester in 1905. You can see the bike racks are full of bikes. There's electric vehicles. Those are, of course, streetcars, but they were electric. We got pedestrians everywhere. I'm going to show you the same view in recent years on the right. Now, this is a situation where walking has been deterred and devalued, and it has now gotten to the point where it is denormalized. It's exceptional. And yet walking is a symptom of a vital, healthy city. And so the task then becomes to reverse this deterrence, this devaluing, and this denormalization, which can be done. In Richmond, we have, of course, the history of street railways from VEPCO, the predecessor of Dominion Energy. And that building where they were headquartered at Franklin and 7th is still there. It's a gorgeous building. It's worth a look if you haven't noticed it before. And we had, or you had in Richmond, electric streetcars. Richmond, as I think you know, is the pioneer of electrification going back to the 1880s. It's spread from there throughout the world, and we have extensive streetcar service. We are in the middle of that red circle right now, surrounded by the former street railways. There is some recovery in the form of the free bus service that's now extending everywhere as well. These are ads for VEPCO's electric streetcars and buses in the city. Now this, of course, also has an important history in the history of segregation, of racial injustice. Rather than me walk you through that, I want to give you a recommendation of the person who's done it better than anyone I know. Blair Kelly, in this book called Right to Ride, writes about organized efforts to defeat segregation on streetcars in the Plessy versus Ferguson era. You know, the 1896 Supreme Court ruling that said, that provided for separate but equal. In Richmond, as I'm sure some of you know, when that was introduced by state law in 1904, black Richmonders refused to ride the streetcars and walked instead. And the Richmond Planet, the black newspaper in Richmond, led that effort, and they're showing you in that giant zero on the right that no black people were arrested because no black people were riding the streetcars anymore because of segregation. If you're going to have segregated streetcars, we're going to walk instead. Now there's a number of important lessons in this. One is that actually walking, when that is a practical alternative, is a source of leverage. It's very hard now to object to car domination by walking instead because of the distances and the dangers involved. But you could practically walk in Richmond in protest against segregation in 1904, and although it did not defeat the segregation ordinance, it did bankrupt the streetcar company. And here we see walking as an expression of black power in Richmond in 1905. This is on Emancipation Day, and that streetcar has probably got no black people on it because of the segregation ordinance, but black people are walking and celebrating their pride as Richmonders in 1905 there. We even have a history, little known, of protests against segregation on streetcars akin to the Montgomery bus boycott, without the boycott, but with the arrest. Catherine Coleman was arrested in 1943 because she was not going to have it. She was not going to give up her seat for a white passenger just because of this outrageous law. And she accepted a sentence and a fine instead of comply with this ordinance. Point number 2 of the 4, Safe Streets advocacy is a great American tradition. We have a contrary history in which we normalized high-speed driving everywhere with great danger. That's due to a lot of sources exemplified by this book, a textbook from 1941, funded by the Automobile Manufacturers Association, but also official traffic engineering standards. And in this book, the author, Maxwell Halsey, says people should be able to drive wherever they want, and speed is not necessarily dangerous. It's a matter of re-engineering the roads to make speed safe, and also it's a matter of deterring walking, which is an obstacle to traffic, as Maxwell Halsey defined it. His justification for this was a supposed preference or free choice of people, which was completely false, because when he wrote this book, most Americans did not drive day to day. In fact, it was only in the 1960s that most American women of driving age even had a driver's license. So he is making this up. It may have been the preference or choice of the people who drove, but it was not the Democratic preference or the Democratic choice. We see versions of this error, of this fallacy, in official reports. Californians prefer to drive. That's why we don't have people riding transit. Of course, we know the real reason is it's very hard to find transit in most of California. Same thing in Denver's strategic plan, where they equate circumstantial practices with essential preferences. In other words, what people do when they don't have choices is misrepresented as what they prefer. To know what people prefer, we have to give them good choices. We see that in official reports throughout the 20th and into the 21st century. Many of these were reinforced by a publicity campaign that came out of General Motors that says Americans have a love affair with the automobile. This is the statement that says, why bother promoting alternatives? This is what Americans love. That's a General Motors invention. They invented this line on Valentine's Day 1957 to sell Chevrolets, propagated it, and with the direct purpose of saying, you eggheads who are criticizing this on grounds of cost, efficiency, and safety, you hate Americans because this is what Americans really love. Love is blind, love will find a way, we will accommodate the automobile at all costs. Now we know that in other countries, this is the Netherlands, there's a history of advocacy, of protest against car domination. These Amsterdammers in 1972 are illegally blocking motor vehicles to demand safe streets for pedestrians, for bicyclists, and for children, as well as for adults. Now, when I've shown this picture for the first couple of times, people said, well, this isn't very useful in America because we have no such tradition. Well, I couldn't contradict them at that time, but I can now. Americans, especially American women, especially American mothers, did the same thing decades earlier. They did this in cities large and small. They even did it in small towns and suburbs. They did it in black, brown, and white communities. They did it in rich, middle class, and poor communities all over this country. Mothers demanded safe streets. This is Los Angeles. Mothers are illegally blocking a street in 1941, demanding a crossing guard to protect their children. This is Wichita, Kansas, and mothers are illegally blocking an arterial highway at the risk of their lives, demanding safer streets for children. This is Pacoima. It's in the San Fernando Valley near LA. It's a majority black and brown community then and now. The man on the far left had just had his son killed the previous day. He was just trying to cross the street to go to school, and the residents there said, we demand something better, and they got the traffic light they were demanding. In Sarasota, Florida, which is one of the most dangerous cities in America for walking and biking, these women in 1958, 60, and 61, in that era, they formed a bicycle club and they had a take the road attitude. We're going to command the lane. And the reason why these pictures are of poor quality is they never made it into our official history. You have to dig for this stuff. This is the stuff that comes up much more easily now thanks to the digitization of newspapers. Even in rural America, mothers demanded safe streets. That's upstate New York. This is Pittsburgh. This is Philadelphia. And when you see a demand for traffic lights, that's a code, you can translate that as a demand for slower driving. They know that to get results, they need a message that's actionable, and demanding traffic lights and stop signs was the preferred way to do it. Here is Camden, New Jersey. Overwhelmingly, it was mothers. These are all real headlines from newspaper stories all over the country, connected with events where mothers, or women in general, illegally blocked streets. Some fathers and men participated as well in this. Now, we don't see very much of this anymore. We now live in a country where much of the country has decided that you have to have children driven everywhere, where if there's a two-parent household, each adult has to have a car, where even the teenagers may need a car as soon as they're old enough, and that's an abandonment of this tradition. What's supposed to make that work in recent years, since especially the 80s or the 90s, is tech. In a recent version of that, we have this 2023 ad that says, don't worry, Cruise, owned by GM, is going to solve all these problems. We won't have 43,000 people being killed each year because tech is going to solve it. I have a very important message here, and it's easy to misunderstand it. I'm not saying tech isn't useful. It can be a lifesaver. It can be profoundly important. But when the message becomes, we can protect the status quo and make the status quo safe by making every car into a robot, now we're talking about something that's completely infeasible. The cost of these cars is breathtaking. When a person paid a fare for a Cruise, just like a person pays a fare for a Waymo now, they're paying a microscopic fraction of what it costs to supply that ride. Someday those costs have to add up, and that illusion, funded by Alphabet, which owns Waymo, by General Motors, which owns Cruise, is a very expensive illusion that can make us think these things are more practical than they really are. It's not practical, it's not feasible to give every person a ride in a robot car. So my message number 3 is amazing technology is not the answer. It's useful, but it's not the answer. We have a long history of technology being misrepresented. Streets as places just for cars and not for people. But here are 3 more positive examples. I'm going to begin with the man on the left. That's Lewis Hine. Lewis Hine was concerned about child labor a century ago. There was a group called the National Child Labor Committee that had been working on this for decades. They were getting nowhere, trying to relieve, getting children out of coal mines, out of textile mills. Children were selling newspapers in saloons. People wanted this stopped, but they were getting nowhere at all. What changed the game, and I think this is instructive for us today, is Lewis Hine gave these children faces, names, and stories. This is Richmond. Willie Hutchinson, who told Lewis Hine he's 8 years old, selling newspapers all day on the streets of Richmond in bare feet. Here he is with his friend Richard Green selling newspapers in 1911 in Richmond. This is actually I can only guess relatively tolerable work compared to coal mining, but these are the Richmond examples that Lewis Hine had to offer. These pictures, once published and disseminated, helped achieve acts like this 1916 Act restricting child labor in America, and we get the kind of reform that had not been possible until Lewis Hine gave these children faces, names, and stories. It was very important that he not only get the picture, he got the child's name, and he always asked the child a question, and he always quoted the child's answer in the publications that got this accomplished. A second example, this man's name is Charles Hamilton Houston. He had a law degree from Harvard. He wanted to commit his career to ending legal segregation in America, beginning with segregated schools. He had a report when he went to work for the NAACP in 1930 called the Margold Report, 200 pages explaining why the law was on the side of the NAACP and against segregation. This report was getting nowhere, just like the National Child Labor Committee was getting nowhere. So Houston, like Hine, said, what can we do about this? We need to make this vivid. He went to South Carolina and with a rented movie camera, silent camera, filmed schools in South Carolina, filmed so-called colored schools and white schools. There's the white school in Parnell, South Carolina, and there it is, Paxville, South Carolina, and there's the colored school, so-called, in Paxville, South Carolina. The white school and the black school. This film helped start the effort. It attracted the funding that the Legal Defense Fund needed to pursue these cases, and it made the case visible, such that by 1954, and as you can see, it took decades, we finally get a unanimous Supreme Court ruling that segregation of public schools is unconstitutional. There's the headline in the Washington Post. Unimaginable change is an amazing thing, and I think you can see that amazement in the face of Nettie Hunt as she holds up this same newspaper headline for her daughter Nikki. That is the face of a person who has witnessed a change that seemed impossible. Of course, this is only the beginning of a new struggle, but it is nevertheless a breathtaking achievement. Final example, some of you may recognize Rachel Carson here. In 1959, Rachel Carson got a letter from her friend Olga Huckins, and Olga Huckins was a bird watcher, and she noticed that populations of birds were going away, others were dying on her lawn, twitching and shaking to death in front of her eyes. And that vivid example of what toxins like DDT were doing to wildlife became the seed from which Rachel Carson's book grew, published first in this article, and then as the famous book Silent Spring. And the title tells you the technique. The technique is not just to present you with the data, but to connect it with a substantive reality, a vivid story, real effects. And this book, because of this book, she testified in Congress. She was already dying of cancer by this point, but was managed to testify to the point that after her death, we get the Environmental Protection Agency as a federal office, and we get a complete ban of DDT for domestic use in the USA by 1972, which is just 10 years after Silent Spring. What can we use today to do the same kind of techniques? I think you've seen these techniques exemplified in Smart Growth America's Dangerous by Design. If you haven't seen this report, I recommend it to you. I think it's in the tradition of Lewis Hine, Charles Hamilton Houston, and Rachel Carson. You can go to Families for Safe Streets, where you can find a map where people are putting the faces and the stories of the people killed in American, it pains me to say everyone you're seeing here was killed on roads and streets in America, but now at least their names and faces and stories are being told like Lewis Hine told the stories of child workers and plotted on a map. In fact, my full name is Peter Daniel Norton. My middle name is for the man on the lower left who was killed before I was born, with those other 3 young people in that picture, and I put them into that database as well. We can use movies like Power Trip that show the stories with the faces of the people killed by America's high-speed traffic problem. There's another film called The Street Project that I also recommend. Or Angie Schmidt's book, Right of Way, is a great read too. A final example, and I think this illustrates the utility of a little bit of sarcastic humor, comes from your Director of Transportation, Neighborhood Character, which beautifully encapsulates how the status quo gets defended in the name of neighborhood character. I highly recommend this book to you. So, before and after, we had traffic calming, we had shared space, we had pedestrian priority, we had elevated crosswalks before. We can learn from those examples. Those things were practices because they worked. Generations had shown that they worked. In effect, what these pictures exemplify is that besides these 4 lessons, we can go from pedestrian priority to radical revision 1, radical revision being the words of Edward Merrin, whom I quoted before. If this radical revision is possible, if this extraordinary reversal of priorities in streets can be achieved once, it can be achieved again. I think this is where we need to go, and I think Richmond has been showing the way for the rest of the country. Thank you very much.